Trump. Good evening, I'm Edel Howlin. Welcome to Red, White and Blue. Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist and author of the New York Times bestseller, The Making of Donald Trump, David Cay Johnston, has spent decades covering the business tycoon's ascension to power. In his book, Johnston, drawing on years of interviews, court documents and public statements, delves into Trump's journey to the top, from his family's real estate fortune to his bid for the United States presidency. So we ask, who is the real Donald Trump? Tonight, we are very pleased to welcome Pulitzer Prize winner and the author himself, David Cay Johnston. And as always, leading our discussion, our hosts, David Jones and Gary Polland.
We're going to be nice to Donald Trump today, and thank you for coming, David Johnston.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, listen, I understood it took you something like 27 days to write this book. It was released on August the 2nd. Congratulations on inserting yourself into a presidential race. I just wonder if you had any motives involved in getting it out so quickly.
Well, when Donald Trump announced this time, he's been talking about running for president since 1985, and he's run in the past. I immediately said, he's serious this time. I was the only national journalist who said that. And I wrote pieces aimed at journalists saying, these are the questions you should be asking Donald Trump. None of those questions were asked by journalists. Ted Cruz did eventually ask one, and Marco Rubio asked one. And when the opportunity came along to do this book, at the end of May, and they said, can you do a book in 3 weeks? And I said, no, but I'll do it in 4. And it was hell, but I did it because I had written maybe 25 pieces in the last year trying to get people to understand who Donald Trump is as opposed to who he's telling the public he is.
So who is the real Donald Trump in 2 minutes or less?
Yeah. Everything I'm going to tell you is from the public record, okay? There's no hidden sources or anything else. And I know Donald. I've known him for 28 years. He has spent his entire life embracing criminals, going out of his way to do so, con artists, Russian mobsters, American mafioso. His father's business partner was a mob guy. He has a long history of swindling workers out of their pay, including $4 an hour illegal immigrants. He fought for 18 years not to give their full pay, and they never got it. He went out of his way to involve himself deeply and to protect a major cocaine trafficker who supplied him with his helicopters, and he cut off health care to a sickly infant, his own grandnephew, in order to increase his own wealth because of a family dispute. That's who Donald Trump is.
You don't like this guy, I don't think, but let me ask you this, David.
It isn't that I don't like him, it's that that's who he is, you know? I mean,
but you've been around him a great deal. In fact, the book suggests that you've been following him for 30 years or so.
Yeah.
How were you able to separate as a journalist yourself from and become objective in bringing this evidence forward?
Well, let me tell you what Jigsaw John, the famous homicide detective, told me after I personally hunted down a very vicious murderer in LA and got an innocent man freed from prison. He said, professionalism means you don't care who the killer is, but you want to make sure you get the actual killer. And that's what this is about, you know. If somebody I don't like, it would be Hillary Clinton. I only wrote about her twice in my life. I've never met her, and she tried to get me fired over the 2 stories that I wrote.
Well, before Gary...
Can you imagine if she wrote a book on her?
You know,
Yes.
Speaking, you brought up Hillary, and Mr. Trump is thinking that she should be prosecuted, and if he's president, he wants to do it himself, you know. So I was wondering, what have you written, do you think will be the first, in case he's elected, would be the first thing that he sent to the Justice Department and said, I want to nail this guy? What is in this book that will trouble him the most about you?
Oh, if Donald gets elected, he'll do things like put me on the no-fly list, and there'll be other people on his enemies list besides me he will make trouble for. What the country should worry about is he has said he will fire the generals. What is the first thing a dictator normally does when there's a republic, a would-be dictator? You fire those military officers who are loyal to the country and replace them with craven officers seeking power, loyal to the man. And Donald Trump, in his writings and speeches over a long period of time, has said that his philosophy is total and complete loyalty to him. If you just refuse a favor, he will destroy you. And he says, and he gets great pleasure in destroying people's lives. I'm not saying it. He says it in great length. And there will be a crisis because he will order American military officers to commit crimes like waterboarding, torture, other things, and they will refuse those orders, and we will have a constitutional crisis right away.
Yeah. Let's go back a little and kind of get
Sure.
the background. What is it about Donald Trump's background that explains what we're dealing with today?
Well, Donald Trump's grandfather fled the draft in Germany when he was 16 in 1885, came to America and got rich running whorehouses. His father, at 15 years old, his father had died by then, had a business. He's a very industrious guy. He built garages. He opened one of the first self-service grocery stores and sold it at a big profit. And he was also a profiteer on the taxpayers. He built housing for GIs after the war, and President Eisenhower was so enraged over how he had ripped the taxpayers off for $4 million that he threw a fit in the Oval Office, and there were 100 federal investigators put on Fred Trump and others. And Fred Trump's business partner, Willie Tomasello, was a mob front. There are plenty of official government reports on his organized crime connections. When Trump was 13, back in the day, he would have been called maladjusted. His father, because of all the trouble he got into, throwing rocks at babies and playpens and stuff, sent him to a military academy that was well known for the brutality that older class members put on younger ones. And if you listen to Donald Trump, he's a 70-year-old man trapped in the emotions of a 13-year-old boy.
Would that explain the Twitter in the middle of the night?
Oh, the Twitter in the middle of the night, the comments about women. I mean, this is a man who in his mid-40s got national news coverage. NBC News gave him national coverage when he said that Kim Basinger and Madonna and Carla Bruni were pounding on his bedroom door. You know, he didn't know two of them, and the third one calls him the king of sleaze and had nothing to do with him. But you have to stop and ask, what kind of middle-aged man? I mean, 13-year-old boy does that, we understand that. But some middle-aged man. And then in his mid-60s, Howard Stern, the shock jock, gave him the opportunity to walk away from this when Carla Bruni became the First Lady of France.
Right.
And there's a whole chapter in the book explaining how Donald Trump worked very hard to maintain the myth that he and Carla Bruni were lovers without directly saying it. This is not a grown-up person. This is a 70-year-old man trapped in the psyche of a teenage boy.
Which leads me to the something you alluded to earlier, but I want to ask a question about it. How did this guy become the Republican nominee for president with all the stuff you had that the media didn't bring out in the spring, that except for minor instances with Cruz and Rubio, the Republican candidates didn't bring it out in the spring, and now, you know, the things you knew about are now starting coming out because ultimately the story gets told.
Right.
How did this happen?
Donald is a master salesman, and there's a standard thing to all of his deals. And he followed that pattern in the presidential campaign. In the beginning, all he had to do was get a few percentage points. There's actually an episode of The West Wing. It's the same thing. Josiah Bartlett says, I didn't expect to be in the White House. I got a little better vote than anybody thought, and now I'm here. And then he began picking off the weakest of these candidates. Most of the people who ran, I don't think were competent to be president. I mean, John Kasich, unquestionably competent. Jeb Bush, competent. It doesn't matter whether you like these people or not, they were competent. But there were a whole bunch of people who are incompetent who were in that race, and that came to Donald's advantage. In addition, because Donald had quit in 2012, saying, well, I really should be president, the country needs me, but my TV show needs me more, it was regarded, his campaign was regarded by journalists as a joke.
Right.
And that was a fundamental error. That's what I tried so hard to warn my peers about in national journalism. This wasn't a joke. He was serious this time, mostly because his show was in danger of being canceled. And to Donald Trump, short of dying, the worst thing that could happen would be for the tabloids, the New York Post and the New York Daily News, to have a cover. NBC to Trump, you're fired.
Wow. Well, so you figured him out when?
On this issue?
Yeah, no, on his figure, on the issue that you just described about his character.
Well, I met Donald in 1988, and I immediately recognized he's P.T. Barnum. He's selling you tickets to the Fiji Mermaid, and he's really good at it. And then when I talked to his competitors, including Steve Wynn, who is a very successful casino mogul, and some of his own guys, they started telling me Trump doesn't know anything about the casino business. And I'm like, oh, come on, that's ridiculous. How can he own two casinos? And they said, no. All he knows how to do is take money out of the business. He doesn't know the games. He doesn't know the odds. He doesn't know customer management. He doesn't know anything. So the first time he and I sat down for an interview, I fed him a false statement about the game of craps. And he incorporated it into the answer and ran with it. I had 3 backup questions just in case. This is what investigative reporters sometimes do. Litigators do this too. And he ran with these falsehoods. And that's when I realized, oh my goodness, they're right. He doesn't know anything. And over time, I came to realize he's essentially, at heart, a con artist.
It's not that easy to get a casino license.
No.
And so it's hard for me to understand, and you explain it in the book.
How
did he keep it, you know, and what did he do to avoid losing it?
Well, he got the license by persuading the Attorney General of New Jersey, who was about to run for governor, to limit his investigation of him to 5 months. Every other casino applicant got about 18 months of scrutiny, and they sent detectives all over the world. They missed 4 FBI investigations of Trump. They eventually found them, but they missed them. They missed his mob connections and everything else. So once the investigators had recommended him, the only person they ever recommended for a license because his record appeared to be clean, they of course now have an institutional imperative to never do anything that would cause them to have to say, we made a mistake here, and yank his ticket no matter what comes forward. Then one of Donald's greatest skills has been shutting down and diverting and compromising law enforcement investigations. And the best example is Joe Wexelbaum, the cocaine trafficker. Donald got his helicopters from this guy and the maintenance of his personal helicopter from this guy, even though there were better financed, better run helicopter companies. The guy goes bankrupt twice. Donald sticks with him. He rents him an apartment that he personally owns under very unusual circumstances. And when Joe gets indicted, Donald should have walked away. The New Jersey Casino Control Act said that you as an owner, that's a privilege, not a right, must prove by clear and convincing evidence that you do not associate with criminals. Instead, Donald wrote a letter pleading for mercy, saying, Joe Wexelbaum's a stand-up guy. He's a credit to the community. And then mysteriously, because neither the prosecutors or the defense can explain this, the case gets transferred from Cincinnati, Ohio, to Judge Marianne Trump Berry, Donald's sister. She removed herself from the case, but your lawyers, can you imagine what would happen if a federal judge here in Houston went to the chief judge and said, listen, I can't handle this case because I fly in a drug trafficker's helicopters all the time. Yeah. The terror the chief judge would feel. And that didn't become news for 7 years. And by the way, the guy served 18 months after Donald pled for mercy for him, and another judge took over the case. The mules who drove the drugs, 20 years, up to 20 years.
Yeah, that was
so
guidelines. They were messed up.
Yeah, right.
But talking about Trump, and I guess we can talk a little bit about Hillary too.
I don't know anything about Hillary because I haven't covered her.
Well, you did say you did write about her a couple of times.
Wrote 2
and
stories
you got hammered by them because you told the truth.
I wrote 2 stories, Gary, about how Hillary Clinton and Bill paid more than twice as much federal income tax as the law required because they got bad tax advice, and every dollar that they paid in excess tax didn't go to charity. They didn't benefit, but the charities were shortchanged, and she went ballistic over that. And by the way, the next year, the Trumps followed by the implicit tax advice in my story on doing their tax returns, and charity got all the money.
Well, that's nice to hear.
It was a good thing, but she was furious over that story, wanted to get me fired.
But in terms of political philosophy, and we know Hillary Clinton is a New York liberal. I mean, that's what she is.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Is Donald
Trump? She's a centrist liberal. Donald Trump is
what?
Donald Trump is not a Republican.
Not a conservative.
No. Donald Trump has argued for many years that we should have universal single payer, or not necessarily single payer, but universal no out-of-pocket health care, just like kindergarten and the roads,
right.
Which, by the way, I've written and shown would be the best economic reform we could make in America. It would be the equivalent of eliminating income taxes for 99.3% of Americans. Donald Trump was long in favor of basically abortion on demand. Donald is a salesman, so he will tell people whatever will get him what he wants. If he'd run as a Democrat, he would have run with those things. He was running in the Republican primary, so he ran with those things.
So if by some miracle he gets elected president, there's any conservatives who think he's going to have a conservative administration probably is whistling as the wind blows by.
Well, it isn't that it would be conservative. It's that Donald doesn't have any philosophy except Donald. There is not a single act of public service in Donald Trump's 70 years. There's no record of any political philosophy that has any significant meaning. That's why when he's asked significant questions, you can like or dislike Hillary Clinton. When she gets asked questions in debates, she is prepared for them and has answers, whether you like them or not. Donald doesn't understand the question. He didn't know what the nuclear triad was, and Marco Rubio had to school him, and he'd been asked the same question 4 months earlier by Hugh Hewitt on his radio show and never learned.
Didn't get it, right.
He doesn't understand the duties, powers, and limits on the presidency. He clearly, in the answers he gave in the second debate, has no idea of the politics of what's going on in the Middle East. He doesn't understand who the people in ISIL are and what's motivating them.
All right, let's go back to the media.
Yeah.
The media had everything you'd come up with was available to the media to go after Trump in the spring during the primaries, which would have sunk his ship in terms of being the Republican nominee.
Might have sunk it.
Well, let's hope that the American people are smart enough to figure that out. It appears they are. So he would have been sunk. He would not have been the nominee. Was the major media motivated or in the tank, basically, for Hillary Clinton to put up the P.T. Barnum candidate, which would ensure her victory, even though next to Trump, she's the most unpopular candidate that has ever run for president?
No, and that's not how it works. Here's the problem. The fastest disappearing white-collar job in America is journalist. There were 60% more journalists in this country in 2000. Back in the 1980s, I spent, in today's money at the LA Times once, $25,000 on one paragraph. Wow. There were tons of money, there were big staffs, and you could really do things. Now what we have is older people like me, instead of being around to teach younger people, we've all been pensioned off. The budgets are much smaller. There's been a tremendous cowing of journalism organizations. You know, you do something tough on any candidate, even Fox with Megyn Kelly's questions, look at the criticism that they get. So there's been this caution and this pullback. And frankly, most journalists just couldn't believe that Donald Trump had a chance. And I didn't say he would get the nomination on the day he announced. I said he might. But I also recognize people should prepare for this because he's not like anybody else. Everybody else who ran, who's a serious candidate, so I'm excluding people like Ben Carson, they have a record of public service. But Trump, there's no public service there. There's no public philosophy. It's about winning the biggest prize of all, which is I was elected president. He's even said he doesn't want to do the job of president. He'll appoint somebody else to do the work.
So how does he keep the stories from being run? I mean, does he go to the top, to the general managers, to the owners of these
Well, he's threatened, he now is publicly threatening to sue everybody in sight, but he was threatening everybody with litigation. I've had several little tiny news organizations say they can't write about my book, even though it's all public record, because if Trump just sued them, it would destroy their business. He called me at home to tell me, David, if I don't like what you write, I will sue you. Donald, you're a public figure. That means he would have to prove I knowingly lied intentionally. No chance of that. And he goes, doesn't matter, I'll sue you anyway. And click. Donald has intimidated and threatened and made difficulty. He's done it not to the working reporters, but to bosses, so they're cautious and careful. Notice that NBC had the videotape that's upset everybody, but it was the Washington Post that broke the story, probably because somebody at NBC sent it to him because NBC wasn't moving to put it on the news. Never heard of one news organization, somebody inside slipping something to somebody else to get their own bosses to move forward.
How is it that Trump University didn't take him down at the time?
That is very surprising. Trump University is a scam from the get-go. The report that was released by the former head of the consumer division here in Texas shows he has no legal defenses of any kind in this case. And at the end of the day, both the two civil cases that are in California and the New York Attorney General's case are going to be a terrible problem for him because he doesn't have legal defenses. I don't know. I don't understand it. I'm very troubled about what's happened to my business, okay? I have said to 3-star generals of the United States Army, General, don't lie to me. Don't lie again. If you lie, every junior officer is going to know that you're a liar. If you don't want to answer my question, don't answer it. But don't lie. If you did that today, I suspect you'd get fired.
Well, and you talked about the journalism problem, that it basically the profession's disappearing.
Yeah.
What does that say about the future of democracy in America?
Oh, I think our democracy is in terrible, terrible trouble. A lot of people think this is a reality show, and they want to vote for people based on do they like them or not, rather than do you have the chops? Are you competent? Have you prepared for this job? Do you have judgment and temperament? And I think this is a real serious problem. If Donald Trump does not get elected, he's not going away. Donald Trump and Roger Ailes, who was fired after particularly vulgar revelations about his sexual harassment, and Steve Bannon, who is the chairman of Breitbart, which just makes things up. Paul Ryan is a secret agent of Hillary Clinton, according to Breitbart. They're going to start a new media business, and they're going to foment trouble. They're going to appeal to people who are bigots, and they're not going away. This is a real problem. And this is a terrible thing for the Republican Party. You know, Aristotle said democracy is to rule and be ruled in turns. We don't want one-party rule. Yeah. It wasn't good when the Democrats for 40 years controlled Congress, or controlled the House anyway for the whole 40 years. We need to have back and forth, and we should be having things that are centrist, but we've created a system where, through gerrymandering and campaign contributions, the democracy is serving the interests of a narrow group of people. I coined the phrase that you've heard a lot, the donor class, the political donor. I call it the political donor class. Most people now say the donor class, to describe this problem. and it's incredible the enormous influence a narrow group of people are having on both sides in who we get to vote for, not just for the presidency.
Donald Trump brags about being on both sides of
yes,
this
he does.
argument, you know.
Well, and Trump also said his big thing during the primaries was, I'm self-funding, so no one can influence me in any way, the special interests.
Well, he's also self-profiting. Our anti-corruption laws mean that he when he leases his jet and his office space and everything else for himself, he has to make a profit by law.
Right.
So Donald Trump will walk out of this as long as he raises more money than the loans he put up that he says he's not going to have paid back, but he hasn't filed the paperwork. He'll make money off this at the end of the day.
But how about this? You know, you talked about Trump, and he has a monumental ego. He likes being in this news. He likes to be thought of as a winner. The way this trend in this election is going, he's going to come out of this election as a teenage narcissistic loser.
Well, you know what? You just don't like, you're part of the rigged system. You may think you're a Republican, you're just against it. I actually won this election. They cheated and they stole it from me. That's what Trump's going to tell us. And Donald has a whole history of failed businesses. They all follow a similar pattern, except Trump U, where he put $1 million up front. He gets loans or fees up front. He extracts as much cash as he can, as quickly as he can. That's why his casinos went out of business and other ones continue to be profitably operated. And when they fail, he just goes on and makes another deal. And he's done this all throughout his life. And he stiffs vendors, he stiffs workers. It's a man who fought for 18 years not to pay illegal immigrants $4 an hour. I mean, that sent a message to everybody else.
I think the legal fees would have been higher.
They were.
You've seen a lot of tax returns, and you've compiled data that identifies.
And I'm drafting a new federal tax code. That's my next book.
Well, you've got a couple minutes to tell us about that. But what's behind the refusal to turn over his tax returns? What's he afraid of?
Well, the last year we know that Donald Trump paid taxes was 1977. I wrote a speech for him at the Daily Beast and Investopedia how by coming clean about not paying taxes, he could get elected to the White House if he read my speech. He's not going to do it, but I think he might get him elected. There is very strong indications of fraud in Donald Trump's 1984 tax return. His tax lawyer and accountant testified under oath. That's my signature, but neither I nor my law firm prepared that tax return. And it showed hundreds of thousands of dollars of expenses with no justification of any kind. He committed sales tax fraud. There's a chapter about that at the Bulgari store. Mayor Ed Koch said he should be in jail for 15 days for that, which would have cost him his casino license. He's told the public one of his golf courses is worth over $250 million, and yet he tells the tax authorities it's worth 10. He says another one is worth more than 50, but for tax purposes he says 1.3. What that tells me is that in addition to the legal deals he did, by the way, he didn't do them, Jack Metnick did them, that there's a good chance there's fraud in his tax return. We would also find out where he's getting money. I mean, he's acknowledged he gets tens of millions of dollars from Russian oligarchs. You notice he always is praising Vladimir Putin because you don't stay an oligarch or even alive if you're not on the in with Vladimir.
It does seem like every time he gets into a little bit of trouble, there's a WikiLeaks that we hear about, that people say is coming from the Russians.
Well, it's pretty good evidence that the Russians are interfering in our election.
Yeah, but to be fair, the WikiLeaks release of Hillary Clinton's Wall Street speeches, the Clintons haven't said those aren't true.
No, that's right. No, I think they're true.
Think about this, given in a normal election cycle, John Kasich is the nominee. This race is over, and Kasich's going to be the next president.
Yeah, if John Kasich had been nominated, he would, I think, very clearly be the president. And I know a lot of liberal Democrats who don't like his policies, but the one thing they say about him is absolutely competent to be president. I don't think anybody questions his competence, whereas with Donald Trump, I think it's quite clear at this point now that I was right in the beginning. He's not competent.
Yeah, well, it sure looks like more and more people.
He's competent at doing something right. I mean, the guy.
Well, yes, he knows how.
He's 70 years old, and look where he is.
Well, he knows how to make deals.
He knows how to tweet.
He's made himself a brand name, a household brand name. That's quite an accomplishment. But there's no evidence that he's a billionaire. None at all. And by the way, when he was asked under oath, how do you determine your net worth? Now, I don't know about you, but I say, well, I own these assets, a house and stocks.
And liabilities.
And here are my liabilities, and the difference is my net worth. Donald Trump, well, it depends on my feelings. And the lawyer goes, excuse me? And he goes, well, yeah, if the country's doing well, I think I'm worth more, and sometimes I don't feel, and it's just amazing. I mean, if somebody sitting next to you on an airplane or in a bar said that, you would say, this guy's nuts.
He actually said 9/11 is the kind of thing that would maybe interrupt his understanding about what he's worth.
And it might for a while, but Donald Trump back in June of last year, within a matter of days, said he was worth 8.7 billion, 10 billion, more than 10 billion, in one case 11 billion. Nothing in the market would suggest anything like that.
But I think that was money from Zimbabwe.
It was money.
So it's only worth $100.
It's like the famous women beating on his bedroom door. Yeah. He just imagines it.
David, Cay Johnston, thank you so much. It was a very illuminating meeting. My only regret is the Republicans didn't listen to you last spring.
Thank you,
Right,
Gary.
Adele? They should have listened.
It's a fascinating election cycle, that's for sure. Remember, you can catch Red, White and Blue every Friday at 7:30 p.m. here on TV8 and again Saturdays at 6:30 p.m. We also invite you to visit us online and send us your comments. We want to hear what you have to say about the issues that affect Houston. You can submit your comments at houstonpublicmedia.org on Facebook and on Twitter at RWE_8. And don't forget to like us. Thanks so much for watching. Good night.